Relax, you're not my boyfriend. Those 5 words became the soundtrack to 3 months of psychological torture I didn't even realize I was enduring. I first heard them at Altitude Rooftop Bar in downtown Denver on a humid Thursday evening in July, delivered with a laugh that should have been my first warning sign. I was there after work, still wearing my municipal water treatment facility uniform, nursing a beer, and watching the sunset paint the Rocky Mountains purple when I noticed her. Tiffany commanded attention without even trying. Blonde hair that caught the last rays of sunlight. Wearing a black cocktail dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Moving through the crowd like she owned every conversation. She was surrounded by at least 4 different guys, each one clearly trying to impress her. And she was playing them like a virtuoso conducting an orchestra of male desperation. I watched her cycle through the same routine with mathematical precision. She'd laugh at their jokes, touch their arms, lean in close enough that they'd think they were making progress. Then step back and deliver that line with a smile that somehow managed to be both dismissive and encouraging. The guys would look confused for a split second, then laugh nervously and try harder. It was masterful manipulation disguised as playful banter. And when she made eye contact with me across the crowded rooftop, I should have looked away. Instead, I found myself drawn into her orbit like every other man in that place. She approached me during a lull in her rotation, sliding up to the bar with the kind of confidence that comes from never being rejected. She ordered something expensive and complicated while I sat there feeling underdressed and out of place. We talked for maybe 20 minutes about nothing particularly meaningful. My job testing water quality. Her work coordinating luxury events for Denver's elite, the unseasonably warm weather. She seemed genuinely interested, asking follow-up questions about water treatment processes that surprised me. I started thinking maybe I'd misjudged her, that perhaps she was just naturally social rather than manipulative. Then her phone buzzed with what was probably a text from one of her other admirers. And when I made a joking comment about her popularity, she delivered the line that would haunt me for months. The way she said it with that specific combination of dismissal and invitation made it clear this wasn't just casual conversation. It was a challenge, a game, a test I didn't understand the rules to. I laughed it off, paid for my beer, and headed home. But I couldn't stop thinking about her. Over the next week, she started showing up in my regular places, the coffee shop near the water treatment plant where I grabbed breakfast, the brewery where I met friends for trivia night, even the hiking trail I used for my morning runs. Each time, she'd act surprised to see me engage in light conversation that left me feeling like maybe we were building something. Then deploy her signature phrase whenever the interaction threatened to become too real. I began to realize I was being hunted, studied, categorized as another source of validation for her ego. The worst part was knowing exactly what was happening while being unable to stop myself from hoping this time would be different. The manipulation escalated when Tiffany started inviting me to her work events as her +1, then systematically destroying my confidence in front of Denver's social elite. The first invitation came through a text that felt almost intimate. She needed someone reliable to accompany her to a charity gala at the Brown Palace Hotel. Someone who wouldn't embarrass her in front of important clients. I spent a week's salary on a decent suit and actually looked forward to seeing her in a different context. Maybe discovering the real person beneath all the games. What I found instead was a masterclass in public humiliation disguised as sophisticated entertainment. She introduced me to wealthy donors and event sponsors as her friend Ryan, then spent the evening flirting aggressively with potential business contacts while I stood there like expensive furniture. When a tech entrepreneur started showing serious interest in her, she pulled me aside and whispered that she needed me to pretend we were dating to make him work harder for her attention. The moment I played along and put my arm around her waist, she laughed loud enough for everyone nearby to hear and delivered her trademark dismissal with extra venom, adding that I was sweet, but clearly misreading the situation. The psychological warfare intensified when she began appearing at Wine Coop Brewing Company on Thursday nights. My sacred trivia tradition with coworkers from the water treatment facility. She'd arrive with different dates each week, a personal trainer one time, a lawyer another, Always men who looked like they'd stepped out of magazine advertisements for success. She'd choose a table directly in my line of sight, but pretend not to notice me, laughing too loudly at her date's jokes while periodically checking to see if I was watching. During bathroom breaks, or when her date stepped outside for phone calls, she'd text me casual messages asking how my week was going or sharing inside jokes from our previous conversations, maintaining just enough connection to keep me emotionally invested while publicly demonstrating my irrelevance. The cruelest part was how she'd engineer these encounters to look accidental, always having a plausible reason for being wherever I happened to be, making me question whether I was paranoid or actually being stalked by someone who treated my feelings like entertainment. Her manipulation reached new depths when she started manufacturing crises that required my emotional support, then weaponizing my genuine concern against me. She'd call me crying about family emergencies that turned out to be minor inconveniences, work disasters that resolved themselves mysteriously by the next day, or relationship drama with men she claimed meant nothing to her. I found myself dropping everything to rush to her apartment or meet her for emergency coffee sessions, where I'd spend hours listening to her problems and offering practical solutions. She had this way of making me feel essential during these moments, like I was the only person who truly understood her beneath the surface games. Then the next day, when I text to check how she was handling whatever crisis had devastated her the night before, she'd respond with confusion about why I was being so intense, followed inevitably by her signature phrase delivered with digital cruelty. The emotional whiplash was deliberately calculated. She needed me to care enough to be available for her convenience, while never allowing me to feel secure enough to expect consistency or reciprocation. The breaking point came at a charity wine auction at the Denver Art Museum on a crisp October evening, when I witnessed the full scope of Tiffany's psychological operation and finally understood my role in her twisted ecosystem. I'd arrived early to help with setup since the water treatment facility was one of the event sponsors, thinking I might actually enjoy a work-related social function for once. I was cataloging silent auction items when Tiffany swept in wearing a burgundy dress that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, immediately commanding attention from every man in the room like some kind of attention magnet. I watched her work the crowd with scientific precision, cycling through her targets with the efficiency of someone running multiple long-term psychological experiments simultaneously. She approached a tech entrepreneur who'd recently sold his startup for 8 figures, laughing at his stories about disrupting traditional industries while touching his arm in a way that suggested intimate familiarity. When he excused himself to take a business call, she smoothly transitioned to a real estate developer who owned half the luxury condos in Low, seamlessly adapting her personality to match his interests in mountain biking and craft whiskey. The third target was a venture capitalist who looked young enough to be intimidated by her sophisticated manipulation tactics, and she had him buying her expensive wine within 10 minutes of conversation. Then she spotted me arranging display materials near the registration table and decided to add me to her evening's entertainment roster. She approached with that predatory smile I'd learned to recognize, commenting on how professional I looked in my work blazer while positioning herself so her primary targets could observe our interaction from across the room. She started flirting with an intensity that felt almost desperate, running her fingers along my arm while asking detailed questions about my weekend hiking plans and whether I'd been thinking about her lately. For a moment, I allowed myself to believe maybe she'd realized it was in that moment, when I foolishly thought she might finally understand what she was throwing away, that everything inside me twisted with hope. I told myself that maybe all her games had been some complicated way of testing my commitment before getting serious. And because I wanted to believe it, I started responding to her attention, leaning closer and matching her energy, feeling that familiar hope that this time would be different. But then the tech entrepreneur returned from his call and headed in our direction, and I watched Tiffany's entire demeanor shift like someone had flipped a switch. She stepped back from me with theatrical timing, laughed that soul-crushing laugh I knew too well, and delivered her signature dismissal with additional cruelty designed for maximum public impact. And this time, she added something that cut deeper than usual, telling me I should know better than to take her seriously, while looking directly at the entrepreneur to ensure he witnessed my humiliation. The way she said it, with that combination of pity and amusement, made it clear I wasn't just being rejected. I was being used as a prop to demonstrate her desirability to someone who actually mattered in her social calculations. I stood there watching her immediately pivot to the entrepreneur with renewed flirtation, using the emotional energy she just drained from me to fuel her pursuit of a more valuable target. And that's when everything clicked into focus with devastating clarity. I realized I wasn't her backup plan or her safety net or even her friend. I was entertainment, a human mood ring she could manipulate for emotional validation whenever her primary objectives required a confidence boost. In that moment, I understood she probably had a whole roster of men like me scattered around Denver, each one believing they were building something special with her while actually serving as emotional fuel for her real relationships. Walking out of that museum, I finally understood that the only way to win her game was to stop playing it entirely. So I implemented my withdrawal strategy with the same methodical approach I used for water quality testing: systematic, thorough, and completely uncompromising. The Monday after the museum humiliation, I blocked Tiffany's number, unfollowed her on all social media platforms, and stopped frequenting every location where she might appear. When she tried reaching out through mutual friends or showing up at my workplace parking lot, I treated her like contaminated water, something that required immediate isolation and proper disposal protocols. The hardest part wasn't ignoring her increasingly desperate attempts at contact, but resisting the urge to explain my decision or seek closure through one final conversation. I knew that any response would give her the emotional reaction she craved and reset her psychological manipulation cycle. So I maintained complete radio silence while rebuilding my social life around people who didn't view relationships as competitive gaming tournaments. During this detox period, I reconnected with Madison Chin, Tiffany's former college roommate, who worked as a freelance graphic designer from her converted warehouse loft in Reno. Madison had always been peripherally present in Tiffany's social circle, but never seemed to enjoy the drama-heavy atmosphere that surrounded her former roommate's lifestyle. I'd met Madison briefly at a few group gatherings over the years, but never really talked to her beyond polite small talk about her nature photography hobby or my work in environmental science. But when I ran into her at Whole Foods 3 weeks after my museum awakening, she seemed genuinely surprised to hear I was no longer entangled in Tiffany's web of manipulation. She immediately offered to buy me coffee to share some information she thought I should know about my former tormentor's behavioral patterns. And what Madison revealed during our 2-hour coffee session at Incorporated Coffee completely recontextualized everything I'd experienced with Tiffany and explained the sophisticated psychological warfare I'd endured for months. Madison told me that Tiffany's signature phrase originated during their sophomore year at CU Boulder, when Tiffany deliberately seduced Madison's boyfriend using the exact same manipulation tactics she'd later deployed on me. Madison had been dating a pre-med student named Alex for 8 months when Tiffany decided to prove she could steal him just because she was bored and wanted to test her power over men. She'd spent weeks flirting with Alex while telling Madison she was just being friendly, then escalated to private text conversations and study sessions that Madison only discovered after finding romantic messages on Alex's phone. When Madison confronted Tiffany about betraying their friendship, Tiffany had laughed and used her trademark phrase, explaining that Alex was never really Madison's boyfriend if he could be so easily manipulated into cheating, and that Madison should thank her for exposing his weakness before she got more emotionally invested. Madison explained that this wasn't an isolated incident, but part of a larger pattern where Tiffany specifically targeted men who belonged to other women or who her friends had expressed interest in, using her psychological manipulation skills to prove she could have anyone she wanted before discarding them once the challenge disappeared. She'd repeated this pattern throughout college and into her professional life, maintaining a reputation as someone who could steal any man while never actually committing to anyone, because the thrill came from the conquest rather than the relationship. Madison had ended their friendship after the Alex incident, but continued hearing stories through mutual acquaintances about Tiffany's ongoing emotional terrorism campaigns against unsuspecting men who made the mistake of believing her games were actual romantic interest, rather than sophisticated psychological experiments designed to feed her ego and prove her superiority over other women. What started as therapeutic conversations about Tiffany's toxic behavior patterns gradually evolved into genuine friendship as Madison and I discovered we shared fundamental values that Tiffany had always mocked as boring or unrealistic. Madison appreciated directness and emotional honesty in ways that felt revolutionary after months of decoding Tiffany's psychological puzzles. And she seemed genuinely fascinated by my work in environmental science, rather than viewing it as a conversation topic to endure before steering discussion toward more glamorous subjects. Our coffee meetings turned into weekend hiking expeditions through Rocky Mountain National Park, where Madison would document wildlife and landscape photography, while I explained water ecosystem dynamics and environmental conservation principles. These adventures felt like emotional detox sessions where we could discuss our experiences with manipulative people while surrounded by natural beauty that reminded us what authentic connection actually looked like. The contrast between Madison's straightforward communication style and Tiffany's elaborate mind games became more apparent as our friendship deepened into romantic territory through shared interests and mutual respect rather than manufactured drama and psychological warfare. Madison never tested my commitment through manufactured crises or jealousy-inducing tactics, never made me guess what she was thinking or feeling, and never used other men as weapons to manipulate my emotions or prove her desirability. When she was interested in spending time with me, she said so directly. When she needed space for work projects, she explained her schedule without creating mysterious emergencies that required interpretation. She laughed at my environmental science jokes because she actually found them funny, rather than pretending amusement to maintain some complex manipulation strategy. And she shared her own photography passion with genuine enthusiasm rather than using her talents as props in elaborate attention-seeking performances. Our relationship developed organically through collaborative projects where Madison documented my water quality testing expeditions for environmental awareness campaigns, creating a portfolio that combined her artistic vision with my scientific expertise to educate Denver residents about water conservation and ecosystem protection. Working together felt effortless because we both contributed unique skills toward shared goals rather than competing for emotional dominance or using each other as sources of validation. Madison respected my methodical approach to problem solving while I admired her creative perspective and ability to find beauty in technical subjects that most people considered boring, creating a partnership based on complementary strengths rather than psychological manipulation or power struggles. When Tiffany discovered through mutual friends that I was dating Madison seriously, her reaction revealed the depth of her narcissistic injury at being replaced by someone she'd always considered inferior in terms of conventional attractiveness and social status. She apparently spent weeks trying to understand how I could choose her plain former roommate over her sophisticated manipulation skills, unable to comprehend that authenticity and emotional stability might be more valuable than psychological games and manufactured drama. Through the social media grapevine, Madison heard that Tiffany was telling people I'd clearly settled for someone safe and boring because I couldn't handle a real woman with actual standards, revealing her complete inability to understand that healthy relationships are built on mutual respect rather than emotional terrorism disguised as romantic excitement. Tiffany's desperation reached pathetic new heights when she began deploying increasingly elaborate schemes to win back what she'd never actually wanted in the first place, treating my relationship with Madison like a personal challenge to her psychological manipulation supremacy. She started showing up at workplace during lunch breaks, claiming she needed to discuss important matters that always turned out to be manufactured emergencies requiring my immediate attention and expertise. And when those tactics failed to crack my resolve, she escalated to staging fake crises that would theoretically trigger my helpful nature. Her car breaking down near the water treatment facility, sudden family emergencies that required emotional support from someone who truly understood her, and even claims that she was being stalked by dangerous men and needed protection from someone she trusted. Each manipulation attempt became more transparent and desperate as she realized that her signature psychological weapons had lost all power over someone who'd completely stopped caring about her approval or emotional state. The breaking point came when she appeared at Wine Coop Brewing during Thursday trivia night, approaching our table where Madison and I were competing with my coworkers against teams of local engineering students and craft beer enthusiasts. Tiffany had clearly planned this confrontation carefully, wearing the same burgundy dress from the museum auction, and timing her arrival during the break between trivia rounds when maximum witnesses would observe her performance. She launched into her familiar routine of intense flirtation mixed with manufactured vulnerability, touching my arm while explaining how much she missed our deep conversations and intellectual connection, positioning herself to block Madison from the interaction while deploying every psychological manipulation technique in her arsenal. When I failed to respond with the emotional intensity she expected, she attempted to use her signature phrase with reverse psychology, laughing that maybe I really wasn't her boyfriend after all since I'd clearly moved on to someone more my speed. My response was devastating in its simplicity and completely destroyed the power dynamic she'd spent months establishing through psychological manipulation and emotional terrorism. I stood up calmly, paid my tab at the bar, and walked out with Madison, while Tiffany's jaw dropped in genuine shock at my complete indifference to her elaborate performance. The moment became legendary among our social circle because it demonstrated that her manipulative power had completely evaporated when deployed against someone who genuinely stopped caring about her games, approval, or emotional reactions. Madison later told me that Tiffany had stood there for several minutes after we left, apparently unable to process that her sophisticated psychological weapons had been neutralized by simple indifference and authentic happiness with someone else. The desperation in her eyes revealed that she'd finally encountered something her manipulation tactics couldn't control. A man who'd found genuine contentment with someone who valued authenticity over psychological warfare and emotional honesty over manufactured drama. The story reached its perfect conclusion at Madison's photography exhibition opening at Spark Gallery in Reno, where her environmental conservation series, featuring my water quality research, was being displayed for Denver's art community and environmental activists. I felt genuine pride watching Madison explain her artistic process to gallery visitors, describing how she'd captured the intersection between scientific data and natural beauty through landscape photography that documented Colorado's water ecosystems and conservation efforts. Her work transformed my technical water testing procedures into visual poetry that made environmental science accessible to people who'd never considered the complexity of municipal water treatment or ecosystem protection, creating art that served both aesthetic and educational purposes while celebrating our collaborative partnership based on mutual respect and shared values. Tiffany arrived uninvited during the peak reception hours, clearly intending to create drama that would overshadow Madison's artistic achievement and force me to choose between supporting my girlfriend's career milestone and managing her psychological manipulation tactics one final time. She positioned herself near Madison's most prominent photographs, wearing an attention-grabbing designer outfit that contrasted sharply with the gallery's understated artistic atmosphere, and began loudly critiquing the exhibition to anyone who would listen, while making sure I could observe her performance from across the room. When she finally approached Madison and me directly, she launched into her familiar routine of backhanded compliments and subtle intimidation tactics, praising Madison's amateur photography, while suggesting that someone with her event coordination expertise could help elevate the presentation to professional standards that might actually attract serious collectors or media attention. Madison's response demonstrated why she was everything Tiffany could never be: calm, confident, and completely immune to psychological manipulation because her self-worth wasn't dependent on others' approval or validation. She calmly revealed that she'd been documenting Tiffany's manipulation tactics for years through a separate photography series called Emotional Predators, featuring portraits of Tiffany's former victims alongside their written testimonials about the psychological damage caused by her systematic emotional abuse disguised as romantic games. The series had been exhibited at smaller venues around Denver and was gaining attention from domestic violence prevention organizations as an artistic exploration of psychological manipulation and narcissistic abuse patterns that help survivors recognize similar toxic behavior in their own relationships. I proposed to Madison that evening using a custom ring I designed, incorporating elements from her nature photography. A recycled platinum band embedded with small stones collected from our hiking expeditions through Rocky Mountain National Park, representing our shared commitment to environmental conservation and authentic partnership built on mutual respect rather than psychological games or emotional manipulation. Our engagement celebration was surrounded by friends who genuinely supported our relationship because they'd witnessed how we brought out each other's best qualities rather than competing for emotional dominance or using each other as sources of validation and ego gratification. The epilogue wrote itself over the following months, as word spread through Denver's social circles about Tiffany's documented history of psychological manipulation and emotional abuse, forcing her to abandon her sophisticated mind games when potential victims began recognizing her tactics and warning each other about her behavior patterns. She eventually left Denver for Los Angeles, where presumably she could start fresh with new victims who hadn't been educated about her manipulation strategies. While Madison and I built a life based on the revolutionary concept that healthy relationships require emotional honesty, mutual respect, and genuine partnership rather than psychological warfare disguised as romantic excitement.